Batı kısmı. Ümit ediyorum ben şimdi çalışıyorum, Doğu kısmında yapmaya çalışacağım. O tabii Roma ile alakalı, çok net yani. O Roma ile alakalı olduğu böyle. Farklı karakterlerle ifade ediyor Çinliler. Ama sonuç itibariyle bu Rumi'de mesela Tibetçe'de de Türkiye için Rum kelimesi kullanılıyor. Ama bu Rum derken şöyle 18-19. yani şimdi bizim şu anda Lozan Anlaşması çerçevesinde azınlıklarımızdan bir tanesi olan Grekçe konuşan Rumlar değil onlar. Yani o tarihte 15-16 yüzyılda zaten bu coğrafyanın tamamı Roma üzerinden kullanıyor. Yani sakın o Rumlarla bunu karıştırmayın. O iki kavram birbirinden çok farklı kavramlar. Çok farklı kavramlar. O yüzden zaten yani Roma olarak ifade ediyor. Çin'de mi? 12'den itibaren kullanılıyor. 11-12'den itibaren tabii. Ondan önce de Bizans için şey var. Fulin diye bir şey var. O mesela büyük ihtimalle Fulin de gene Selçuklular için kullanılıyor. Tartışma var ama benim kanaatim yani Brett Snyder'ın falan yazdığı şeyler var. Bir soru var mı?
Hocam vakit kaldı.
Soru daha eğlenceli.
You painted quite an interesting picture of the history of relations between Turkey and China through different changes in both countries. At times, I mean, relations, especially over such a protracted period, can have their ups and downs. And we can look, for example, the recent episode with the British Foreign Secretary when he had his own Boris Johnson moment, when he talked about implied gunboat diplomacy during an upcoming talk with China on the anniversary of the Opium Wars, and that was quickly cancelled. Are there any such contentious moments in the relations, history of relations between Turkey and China which could flare up for some reason whatsoever, like this particular one?
You mean in history or? Okay. In history, I think not possibly after the, in Cold War times, maybe there were, but after 1949 there were some tensions or some ups and downs. But later on, after the opening up of reform and opening up of China, which is roughly from 1978, 1979, it's more or less a stable relationship. But there was once in the beginning of 20th century, 1901, which after the Boxer Rebellion happened in China, even the Ottoman Emperor, of course with the help of the Germans, because there were German interests in China, and there was, as you know, there are a really reasonable amount of Muslim minorities living in China at that time and even today. So by the support of the Germans, the Ottoman Sultan sent a delegation to China to appease the Chinese Muslims at the time. So as far as I know, there are no real kind of tensions, but possibly in rhetoric kind of, some tensions happened throughout the time, but mostly in, let's say, after the Talas War in 751, there were no kind of tension up until the Korean War, of course, because in the Korean War we were with the United Nations and we went to the Korean Peninsula, and possibly this was the second time that we had kind of a clash with the Chinese. But apart from that, as far as I know, it's more or less like stable kind of, because it's geographically it's a very remote place. It's very far away. So that's why. I don't know if it's an answer to your question.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's more than geography, because if you look at geography, the chances should be Britain has a lesser chance because it's further away. Cultural maybe, and trade rather.
Actually, especially in the first years of the Republic of Turkey, the relations with China and Turkey, next week, hopefully, my new book is going to be released about that topic. 5 important Chinese characters, Chinese politicians, intellectuals who came to Turkey, the Republican Turkey, in the first years of the Republic of Turkey. And actually, the Chinese elites at that time, they were taking Turkey as a role model, and they want to be like Turkey in 1930s and 1940s. So we can say that, you know, there was a kind of relationship between Turkey and especially the Republican China or the nationalist China, that they were, the nationalists in China, they were thinking as Turks, I mean, modern Turkey, like Republican Turkey, as their role model. So they wanted to be like Turkey in 1930s and 1940s. Of course, after 1949, it's a different story. But the communists was in 1922, they were also in favor of a Turkish victory in the War of Independence. So, I mean, they were kind of, both communists and nationalists were in favor of Turkey in 1920s and 30s.
Hocamıza çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Özellikle bu soru-cevap kısmındaki enteresan tartışma için. Şimdi sırada bir diğer hocamız, doktor öğretim üyesi Valeri Mortva Bey bize 2014 Rus işgali sonrası Kırım'da Kırım Tatar halklarının durumu hakkında sunum gerçekleştirecek. Valeri Bey Kapadokya Üniversitesi Uluslararası İlişkiler bölümünde çalışmakta ve Osmanlı-Rus ilişkileri üzerine çalışmalarında Osmanlı-Rus ilişkileri üzerine. Buyurun sayın.
Evet, geçiyoruz bu konuya ve tüm Çalıştay'ın başlarından çok bellidir. Bu konu, benim konuşacağım konu benim için, benim gözümde olmazsa olmaz bir konu gibi geliyor. Yani tek kelimeyle eğer bakarsak Sovyet sonrası Türk Dünyası jeopolitiği. Yani tek kelime yani şunu gösteriyor, bu konu son yıllarda gelişen olaylar Kırım'da, Ukrayna'da konuşulması gereken bir konudur. Hatta dün artık konuşuldu, Türkiye Rusya'da son zamanlarda dost oluyor ve ben bu konu nasıl uyacak diye düşünüyordum. Ama yani gereken bir konu ve ben İngilizce anlatacağım. Benim için daha rahat olacak, daha rahat olur. İngilizce. In general, everyone knows what happened in 2014 in Crimea, in Ukraine and Russian Federation, even though we didn't talk about it yesterday, actually it was present still, and while we are talking about Turkic world, Russia is always present somewhere behind the scenes. It is there, and we can look down into history, we can look at our present time days. Russia is always there. So what is happening there in Ukraine, we can comment and start from that point that Russia might be the last colonial empire which still exists, which is still there, multinational country, they say. But in fact, if you look at history, there were many empires, we can look in that Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, Ottoman Empire, European colonial empires. All of them ceased to exist, but Russia still is there. And if you would look at the map, have here a map of Russian Federation, it indeed a huge country and in fact not a nation, one nation state, but is an empire. And Russian Federation or Soviet Union or Russian Empire in that way is the continuation of the same entity, just changing over times, over periods, its names, but ruled from one center. Sure, inside Russia we have many Turkic people. Some of them never had their statehood. Crimean Tatars are different in that respect. They have a long history of their own statehood, which was destroyed in 1783. And also this is the closest in terms of history, politics with Turkey, modern days. Turkey and even Ottoman Empire, it directly controlled some part of the Crimean Peninsula. And what we are observing now, some scholars, they define it as the process of dissolution of the Russian Empire, which started in 1917, 1918, following the end of the First World War. Then the second wave was in 1991, and looking from historical perspective, it's not a long period, and in history of other these imperial entities, we also can say that over hundreds of years the borders were extending or shrinking, but finally in some stages they disappeared. So we cannot predict, we cannot know what might happen, but here we can say that